Thank you, Prof. Thank you very much for those warm words and encouraging statement. Now I shall call upon the President of the SRC, Luthando Lukele, who will then be introducing the Vice Chancellor. And after the introduction of the Vice Chancellor, she will then be doing brief remarks. And after the brief remarks, we will then get to the keynote speaker. And then after the keynote speaker, there will be a response by Professor Pillay. And after the response by Professor Pillay, I'm just taking you through the program so that you know what to expect ahead of this evening. There will also be a musical item by Kujenga. So we have a lot that's going to happen here. And then after that, we will then get to screen a short videos just to capture the moment on the 9th of April when the statue of Cecil John Rhodes was taken off its plinth. There will be 3 videos, very short videos, but they capture the spirit of that moment. And I'm sure that some of you who were here 10 years ago, you will see yourselves. And then after that, there will then be a panel discussion. That's where we will have a conversation, critical reflection on what really the removal or the taking off of the statue of Cecil John Rhodes off that plinth. What does that mean? Or what did it mean then? What does it mean now? And then that conversation, that panel discussion will then carry on, and then there will be an opportunity for us to engage after the panelists have given their reflections. And then after that, of course, it will be a closure. And then after closure, it's refreshment, music, and the social, political, and cultural potsoe. Thank you very much. Is it not?
It is a great honor and a profound responsibility to stand before you today as we gather in remembrance, in reflection, and in resistance. I greet you all. My name is Thando Lukele. I know in the pamphlet it's written Luthando. I know when you're in the Xhosa area, you must adapt, and Xhosa people don't have Thando. They have Luthando, so it's okay. I speak to you today not just as an SRC president, but as a part of an all-female presidency, a leadership collective that stands on the shoulders of women who have always led the movement, who have always carried the movement, and often invisible, but yet unshaken. Today marks a decade since students stood in this very university and demanded change, not just for the falling of the statue, but dismantling the systems that have upheld it. Rhodes Must Fall was never about bronze and stone. It was about the violent legacies that structured our universities, about the violent legacies that stem in our institutions. It was about curriculum that excludes. It was about residences that segregate, funding systems that humiliate, a university culture that often forgets who built it. It was about reclaiming space, about affirming Black pain, about Black dignity, and about Black possibility. As we commemorate this movement, we remember the sacrifices of those who dared to disrupt, those who dared to dream of a university that is decolonized, and those who laid the groundworks of the battles we continue to fight today. From curriculum reform to language access, to insourcing and to equitable funding. Today, we remember all those sacrifices. But let us be clear, the struggle and the demand for free quality education has not disappeared. It echoes in every student that goes to bed hungry. It echoes in every student that registers late, every student who's academically excluded due to poverty. But it is in the system, or in the spirit rather, that we welcome the leadership, not for ceremonial purposes, but for purposes to reflect, to account, and to walk alongside students on these ongoing struggles. Allow me, therefore, to introduce someone who leads the institution in these times of turbulences and transformation, someone who is entrusted and entrusted to change the curriculum of the university, entrusted to change the structures of the university. Someone we hope will bring forth the transformation which we envision. Comrades, allow me to introduce the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Professor Musha Mushabela. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. And I'll also extend my gratitude to the Program Director as well, to the leadership that is present here, to the colleagues that are also present here, to the students present here, to the former leaders as well who are present here. And it's such a pleasure for me to see you all present here to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Rhodes Must Fall. As you can imagine, we have been talking about this for some time, last year even, anticipating that this moment is coming and what is it that we ought to be doing as the University of Cape Town. We have had engagements also with the current leaders and the former leaders to think through what is it that we ought to be doing. I think the previous speakers have already highlighted the importance of thinking about Rhodes Must Fall more broadly in terms of what it represents, especially for Black students in this institution, especially for the fact that sometimes we can take it as just one moment representing the coming down of a statue, when in fact, while that is important and symbolic, as it happened 10 years ago, there is a broader call for the institution to change in order to bring a sense of belonging for all students on campus, especially Black students. And creating a climate, an environment, a culture of inclusion and a sense of belonging at times is not something that comes naturally. It's something that sometimes we have to work hard for. And as Professor Ramugondo said, that at times it necessitates protest, and at times, as we may have seen, not just at UCT, but in other places as well, we have seen violence erupt because of the agitation that those who are experiencing these struggles experience. We see this also manifest in our communities. And as a university, we are a macrocosm of society. Things that happen in our society will also affect us. So I think for me, it's important for the current leadership to acknowledge the moment in time, but also the journey that UCT has gone through. The moment in time 10 years ago that led to this point of Rhodes Must Fall, of the statue coming down, but also the journey that the institution has traveled before that and after that. I'm sure it will not surprise you to hear that in many instances, when I engage with colleagues since I took over only 8 months ago, since I took over, when I talk to colleagues and I try to understand certain issues that we are struggling with, that we're dealing with, and trying to understand their roots or the genesis of those issues. Oftentimes, these conversations take us back to Rhodes Must Fall, take us back to Fees Must Fall. And you would wonder why in 2024 or 2025, when you are busy talking about current issues, that you are often taken back 10 years ago. It was also an impression that I had coming into the institution that when I am having to address the difficulties and the struggles that the university is facing, it'll take me back a few years, 2-3 years, often perhaps related to what we often call the governance challenges that the university faces. I did not anticipate that I would often have to go back 10 years. And for that reason, I think it's important to acknowledge the impact that Rhodes Must Fall has had on UCT. It was not small. It was big, and it has left a mark. Now, in a lot of people's memories, it's a painful memory. Not just to those who feel that they were victim of the experiences that took place, but also the people that were seen to be the leaders or agitators. Let us not take this for granted or even mistake this. The people that were seen as the strugglers, the comrades, the agitators, or whatever title was attached to them, at the time of Rhodes Must Fall, you may have looked at them as though these are people who feel a sense of power, who are standing above others, who are causing violence and so forth. You may have seen them that way. But for those that I have engaged with in this institution and elsewhere as I engage with alumni, they also share moments of pain and trauma from those experiences. Now, this is something that I did not expect myself. I did not expect that those people who were involved in Rhodes Must Fall themselves might share difficulties and struggles and trauma and pain that they went through. And I am hoping that as we move forward in this journey, as we mark this anniversary, that we also open up the space for conversations that can allow everyone to heal from the pain that may have been carried from those days. And as I said, one might think that it's a long time ago, but for a lot of people, it's not that long. The memory is still fresh. So it's important then that we listen, we pay attention, and really create a safe space whereby we can have these difficult conversations. And you would have heard that one of the things that I have had to do was open up spaces for dialogue on campus, because one of the questions I kept asking was, but why is it that some of this, what I see as old pain, why is it that it is still so palpable? Why is it still so palpable? Why does it affect us today as much as it does? When one would think that this is old pain, people would have healed and moved on from that. And people told me that there are no spaces for that. And they say the best place that they've had was the UCT club before COVID-19, where they could go after hours with a glass of beer. But it became important then for me as the Vice Chancellor, to think that let us be intentional. It may not necessarily solve all our problems, but let us begin a process of dialogue whereby we can create what may be considered a safe space for us to start talking about the painful experiences that we've had. You will not be surprised if I tell you that in one conversation, there was a case cited to me going back to 2005, 20 years ago, of someone dying on campus as a source of pain for the people that I was having a conversation with. Talking about an assault with an umbrella and so forth. And, we are in 2025 and people are still sharing painful memories that are affecting them today. Now, this is not the UCT environment or climate that we want for the new generation of learners to come and walk into. We want the next generation of learners to walk into a better place. We want the next generation. If we are going to struggle today, if we have struggled 10 years ago, things ought to get better in time. So we've got to commit ourselves, in my view, to making sure that the future generations will walk into an environment, a climate that is much more welcoming, that is less painful, that is allowing them to feel a truer sense of belonging when they are here, and inclusion, and even allowing them to be able to express themselves better in different ways. So I'm standing here to recognize and acknowledge that pain from my own engagements with colleagues over the last few months that I've been part of this institution, and the efforts that we have to make to ensure that spaces are created for us as an institution to heal from that pain and move forward. Also, you'll remember that we had an interesting conversation with Max Price, partly around his book, Storms and Statues, but also just generally about leadership and the impact of looking at leadership across time. And one of the things that was raised in that conversation during the Q&A session is when some of the former leaders who were involved in Rhodes Must Fall indicated that the narrative of what has happened tends to shift in time. It's like we rewrite the story. And in some ways, I think the point that they were making was that management should acknowledge the role that students played in bringing about change, and not tell the story as if management just decided on its own to make some of these difficult decisions. And I thought that was quite profound. And it's something that is easy to lose and something that's easy to miss if one is not paying close attention. And I think it's important then also that the story is told from different angles. The story is told from different perspectives so that we don't just hear one version of the story. The current generation of students that is here today, they know very little about what happened. And if they only hear one narrative, one version of the story, then they are not going to have the full picture of what transpired. So let's also make an effort to make sure that we tell the story from different angles so that it presents a balanced narrative and it does not necessarily overshadow the role that others have played, even if at that time they may have been seen as villains. Let's not necessarily overshadow the narratives and the experiences, and let the versions that are told be representative of the different experiences. And I also think, as I wrap up, I don't want to be too long because I can talk for a long time. I also think that it's important for us to make sure that we don't stop learning from our experiences. One mistake that we can make as UCT, as the university, is to forget, is to just rely on recall now and then when there is an event like this. I think some people that I've had conversations with were saying to me, what is the nature of the scholarship that is emerging out of Rhodes Must Fall? And how do we take that scholarship and actually make sure that it informs the lessons that future generations are going to learn? And surrounding that, I think an important part is to make sure that we capture the story, and we capture the story in such a way that it gives us lessons for the future. So that it's not just an incident or an event that happened, but actually it gives us frameworks and theories and models that we can rely on or call upon in the future when we are faced with dilemmas and difficulties and we have to make decisions. For the future generations to be able to refer to these ideas that emerged through these painful experiences. So, and I think we are a university. We have a lot of scholars. We are capable of doing that. And it will be wonderful to see this emerge. One PhD is not enough. I think that let us leverage these experiences so that we can extend them forward even for the benefit of future generations. If we do that, we might even help ourselves as the University of Cape Town and others to make sure that in similar instances, we don't have to go through the same kind of trauma that we went through as an institution, that we can call upon the lessons learned to inform what we do going forward. We can call upon our experiences. We can call upon the scholarship to help us make these decisions going forward. Finally, I just think that it'll be important for us to make sure that the current crop of leaders, student leaders, and the future crop of student leaders, it is my hope that they be protected from the kind of traumas that leaders that went through Rhodes Must Fall and perhaps RhodesMustFall Must Fall went through. Because one of the things that we're trying to do as South Africa is to make sure that, yes, on the one hand, we are healing from our past traumas, but we can't heal from past traumas while we are causing new traumas going forward. Let's be intentional about that. A lot of the leaders, student leaders that come through here, they're also going to be our future political leaders. Let's make sure that they experience leadership in a positive way. Let's make sure that they are not going to become traumatized leaders in the future, because it also means then that we are not doing ourselves justice in terms of the future generation of political leaders in this country. So let's think long term in the way that we are investing in our young leaders who are coming through the university. We already know this, but I think it's important that we are intentional. It is something that I think for me it's important, and I think about even as we engage with student leaders, and these conversations that I've had with them as well, to say that spend time with former leaders, listen to them, listen to their experiences, so that you can avoid the pitfalls that they encountered, so that you can somehow prevent the trauma that might happen because of being in leadership at a young age and so forth, things that you may not be prepared for. And there's something about caring and looking after our leaders that I think it's important. And I share the same message even in terms of university executive leaders. We've had our share of experiences in this institution in terms of trauma that is experienced by our senior and executive leaders. And I say the same thing, that let's care for our leaders. And it's just a message that I wanted to share as I wrap up, to say the same kind of courtesy needs to be extended to our student leaders now and going forward as well. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
I think this time around, I will take this seat just behind the speaker so that I can be able to remind them of time. President.
Thank you, Dr. Just to highlight, in 2015, I was doing my grade 5, I think. I was in primary. I know. I was in primary, I was doing my grade 5, and I remember following through the Forest movement on television. And the weird thing is I understood what was going on. That's the weird thing. I didn't question why are people protesting. I didn't have an issue with people protesting. I didn't even ask my mom why people were protesting, but it seems I get it, I got it. I understood at that point what the issue was and why these students protesting, or why are people fighting. I remember the likes of Gigi Lamaine releasing songs about fees must fall. I remember the Forest movement as a whole, and the likes of Zuleka Patel afterwards fighting against institutional racism, fighting against the racism they face in their school. And on my response, I remember dyeing my hair. My natural hair color, or the natural hair color of my dreadlocks, is brown. So I remember telling my mother that in my school, George is allowed to go with his blonde hair. Brian is allowed to wear whatever color he wants. So I don't understand why I have to dye my dreadlocks black. Funny enough, my mother got it. She was like, okay, dye your dreadlocks brown if that's what works for you. And I remember going to school with brown hair, and my school principals were perplexed. They called me into the office the first hour, and they asked me, why is my hair brown? I was like, why is yours? And I remember within the Forest movement, I used to understand why students are fighting against institutional racism, because I could see in everything, in every school I used to exist in, I could understand that there's something about blackness that is not accepted. I remember going into an all-black high school in Soweto, and we had a female principal who was black and had dreadlocks. And I remember her telling me that dreadlocks are not allowed in school, so is afros. And I remember being confused about it and not understanding as to why in an all-black school, X years after apartheid, do we still have a problem with the authenticity of natural hair growing as is? Why are we telling children to tie their hair up? Why are we saying afros are too distracting? Why are we saying dreadlocks look somewhat like hippies and it's not allowed in school? And that's in its core what I think my understanding of the Forest movement was about. It was about acceptance. It was about students or learners not being allowed to be black enough, not being allowed to be themselves. And I think when I got to the University of Cape Town, my first question was, why was it that 21 years later was the statue still there? I think that was my first question, right? And my confusion was, the university has long accepted Black students. They've been coming to UCT for hundreds of years. Actually, I almost said thousands. For hundreds of years, the university has been transformative in its approach, and it allowed Black students to be on campus. But what is transformation if it's not open justice? Then transformation is just a decoration. If we are allowing Black students to be in our space for the sake of numbers, then we are no longer achieving what we want to achieve. We're no longer achieving the transformative goal, but we just box ticking the number of students we have. And we say, oh, we do have Black kids, so we are fine. It's like those people who say, oh, I'm not racist, I have Black friends, right? So I think that was my confusion when we started unpacking with the Rhodes Must Fall and the fallist movement as a whole. And I think when we first engaged with all the student leaders who are active at that time, with Khumani, Mastole, Dr. Wandile, I engaged the professors, Prof Shose, Prof Elelwane, and my question was, what, as someone who was there in 2015, do you envision the fallist movement, or 10 years later, or the commemoration of the fallist movement, what do you envision it to look like? And I think the Vice-Chancellor captured it properly when we say, in this reflective process, we need to also envision. What do we want to say about UCT 10 years from now? And when I was looking at, while we were protesting, because we had a mini protest of our own, we looked at the set of issues in which were counted for within the fallist movement 10 years ago. We looked at the fact that they had an accommodation crisis, which resulted in them setting up Shackville and in Sarah Batman. And we looked at the fact that there is a poster in our SRC offices of a student holding a poster that was taken, it was a picture taken 35 years ago, and they were protesting against the accommodation crisis outside of Bremna. And between that picture and the picture that was taken in the fallist movement, there was a 15-year gap, I think, or 25-year gap. And between that picture and our year today, 2025, there's a 35-year gap. And we are still protesting with regards to the same set of issues. So I think then, what then I saw as a reflection process is us also envisioning what we want UCT to be like, for a space to be like for class of 2035. I think it's quite pivotal in us also understanding or analyzing the university in looking whether or not are we transformative in our approach? Are we actually taking the steps to the right direction? And then I was looking at UNASFA's issues. I was looking at the various issues that exist around campus as a whole, or around the country at large, as the university is a microcosm of the country as a whole. And I do recognize the fact that the same cracks of issues we have here today are more or less the same cracks of issues students were protesting against years ago. I was speaking to Edwina from the Office of the Vice-Chancellor, and she was telling me that when she was a student many years ago, she didn't tell me how many years, because she said it's many years ago. She said they used to have an issue with blocks, right? They used to have a state, or the state used to make a contribution towards student finances, but they still would have issues with financial exclusion. They would still have fee blocks. And then my bigger analysis is we won't achieve decolonization of the University of Cape Town if we don't decolonize Western Cape as a whole. We won't achieve decolonization of the University of Cape Town if we don't decolonize South Africa as a whole. Because if we understand that the university is a microcosm of the space it exists in, and Western Cape in Rondebosch doesn't want Black people, then how is it going to accept Black students in a university that is in Rondebosch? So it's therefore then important for us to understand that as a university, we don't exist in our smaller Yana space or in our smaller Yana corner, but we do need to extend this conversation of decolonization to the society at large, because that's where we inherited from the society as a whole. If people from Khayelitsha don't understand that they are welcome in the city of Cape Town, how am I, coming from Soweto, gonna feel welcomed in that same space? So in that same understanding, or in that same analysis, I think it's quite important that while we're having this conversation, because as I highlighted, in 2015 I was in grade 5, so I can't critically analyze what happened in 2015, because whatever I was watching then was on the basis of what media and what I heard from everyone else. But today we are here, and I think it's quite important that as we are here today, we envision what UCT should be like for 2035. But in our vision for UCT for the 2035, let's envision the Western Cape, let's envision South Africa, and let us have those conversations or talk that stem out in the Western Cape, that stem out in South Africa. Let us question why students in Khayelitsha would rather go to UJ than UCT. Do they not feel welcome at UCT? It's something we need to ask. And it's something then we need to understand that if we say they want to come to UCT, but they can't because of financial barriers, or because of cultural barriers, or because they genuinely don't feel welcome, how do we make that space welcoming for the University of Cape Town students, or students from the University of Cape Town? How do we then ask ourselves, as a Black child who comes to UCT, I can't even pray in my own home because I can't burn incense. It's small things like that that speaks to what the culture of a university is, and therefore what the university stands for. So I think in our reflection, because we are reflecting here, it's quite important that we understand that this has to be a healing process first. It has to be a process whereby we understand that people who are protesting at that point in 2015 and 2016 have so much to carry, had so much to carry back then, and we have to allow them to heal. Therefore, it's up to us to take over that process and continue with the decolonial project, or the decolonization project that they started in 2015. We can't leave it up to them or leave it only solely on them. We have to continue with that project because it's still a big question in our country, still a big question in our education system. From a primary school learner to whatever their total metric, is it a reflection of whatever it is in our country? Do we actually teach our doctors to be a doctor in Khayelitsha? Do we teach our doctors to be a doctor in Soweto? Are our students a reflection of what we want to see in the country? It's something we have to ask as a university. And I think in this panel discussion and in our discussion today, it's important to, one, I'm going to repeat again, note the healing part of it, but it's important for us to envision as well. So let us think for the president of 2035, set of issues. I hope their protest is now computer stuff like having a pool on campus, but I think it's about high time we have a shift in issues, or a shift in the issues we have in the University of Cape Town. I can go on and on because I like this topic, it's one of my favorites, but I would like to end it there. And thank you very much for having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof, and thank you, President. Thanks to both of you for those really powerful words. And I think you've brought to us, I think, a very important aspect, which is whether a university can actually become a safe space for unsafe ideas. And the question is, of course, how do we create that safe space within an institution such as a university? You would recognize that, or we are going into a very important, another important aspect of this program, which is a reflection. So I am trying to make sure that we get all our speakers. Now we are going to have Zenande, who is a member of the SRC. She will be introducing our keynote speaker today. Zenande, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zenande Mhlehli, and I am serving as the Undergraduate Academics Coordinator for UCT's SRC. It is a privilege to thank you all for being here today at the Rhodes Must Fall 10th Anniversary Symposium, an important moment of reflection, remembrance, and continued resistance. It is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Shose Kessi. Professor Shose Kessi is the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities at UCT and a renowned scholar whose work speaks deeply to the heart of what we gathered here to discuss. As a community-based psychologist, her research focuses on critical areas such as decolonization, identity, and transformation, often grounded in participatory, community-created methods. Her qualifications include a PhD in social psychology and an MSc in organizational and social psychology with distinction. Her academic contributions have shaped vital conversations around power, representation, and justice in our institutions. And just as importantly, she has remained rooted in the broader social movements that have challenged us all to imagine and fight for a more just and inclusive future. We are deeply honored to have her here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Professor Shose Kessi.
I'm just going to get the presentation. Okay. I want to put on my. If I put this here, it would be fine. Oh, yes. Thank you. Do you want to switch up on that? No. Vice Chancellor, Professor Moshabela, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Ramugondo, SRC President, Tando Lukele, Director of the Center for African Studies, Professor Pillay, Rhodes Must Fall activists, colleagues, students, and friends, good evening. It's an honor and privilege to be invited to deliver this keynote address to mark the 10-year anniversary of Rhodes Must Fall, a landmark moment in the history of the University of Cape Town, also in higher education in South Africa and globally. It is also very special that we're able to host this event here in the Center for African Studies, which was a very generative space for Rhodes Must Fall students 10 years ago, and one that continues to produce critical scholarship in the academy. Thank you to Professor Suren Pillay and colleagues at CAS for hosting us. And I would also like to thank Umani Makwele, Wandile Kasibe, and Mzwamadoda Mondi for bringing us together to mark this occasion. And also our colleagues from the DVC's office, from my office in particular, Namfla and Morongwa. The Rhodes Must Fall movement marked a significant turning point in how we engage around decolonization debates, locally, nationally, and globally, and it reinvigorated the drive for transformation in academia. I think today should be a celebratory event, but as we've heard from the speakers that have gone before me, what underlies the Rhodes Must Fall movement was a lot of very difficult, painful experiences. And so yes, we must reflect on that, but hopefully we'll also find some time to celebrate, and I hope Pujenga is going to assist with that. When I joined UCT in 2011, the university was in the midst of an affirmative action debate and whether to do away with race as a proxy for disadvantage in our admissions policy. And this was given the growing numbers of Black students that were entering university since 1994. The discourses circulating in the media around this debate were highly stigmatizing and described the increasing number of Black students entering UCT as overcrowding the university and bringing down the standards of academic achievement. These racializing images were a reflection of the institutional culture of the university, which, although it had opened its doors to Black students, was still marked by deeply embedded patterns of behaviors, values, beliefs, policies, and practices reflective of the historical whiteness of the institution. Even though Black students had access to the institution, their presence within it was pathologized, presenting them as the problem, echoing Ntabeleng Morake's work on decolonizing UCT. This situation led me to conduct an extensive research project on the experiences of Black students at UCT, and over a 3-year period, I collected written stories and photographs taken by students, describing their affected experiences of the institution. And what I found was that the impact of institutional racism on Black students was severe and led to disengagement, negative self-esteem, depression and suicidal ideation, stress and dropouts. Findings that have been corroborated by international literature on prejudice, stereotyping and discrimination in higher education. During the Rhodes Must Fall movement, Black students referred to Black pain to describe their feelings of exclusion and alienation. Many of the participants in my study spoke about coming to UCT as the first time they felt Black. And here's an example from Kagiso, who says, here we go. Maybe I always knew I was Black, and perhaps I always knew there were white people. I never really cared about it. It never really impacted me in any way. The thing is, I grew up in a township. We never did see any whites, let alone interact with them, unless we went to town. Fast forward a few years, and I find myself in Cape Town, a student at UCT as a fresher, and for the first time ever in my life, I was confronted with the cultural capital that comes with being white, or familiar with the white world. Thus, for the first time ever in my life, I felt Black, I knew I was Black, and suddenly, for the first time ever in my life, too, I felt inferior. Students described the segregation in classrooms, with different sections being named after Cape Town locations. The Camps Bay area at the front of the class was where white students would sit. Colored and Muslim students would sit in Mitchell's Plain, and Black students at the back of the class in Kailicha. They also spoke of the many other forms of microaggressions, such as reluctance from other students to include them in group work, additional scrutiny in assessments, subtle expressions of surprise from others when they got good marks. Wealth differences were also visible. One student recounted her experience of sitting in class next to a young man who would arrive at UCT every day in his Porsche Boxster. And she says, this car could have paid my entire student fees from undergraduate to honors to masters and PhD, but yet I have to sit in class every day next to this student and pretend that everything is normal. Black students describe these daily experiences as a constant reminder of not belonging and a constant reminder of not being on a level playing field with their white counterparts. They were grappling with the guilt of being made to feel that they were taking the place of white students, whilst at the same time shouldering the burden of transformation. Students referred to the problematic monuments and artifacts displayed around campus, the names of buildings, the advantage of having English as a mother tongue, the content of their textbooks and curricula that reified white experiences, and the overrepresentation of white scholars amongst academic staff, all of which contributed to the exclusion of their own knowledge and capabilities, with one student remarking that, I'm a third-year student at UCT, and I've not been taught by somebody who's Black or somebody who's of another color. Many stories reflected how experiences of Blackness were also complicated by intersecting identities. Black women students and Black LGBTQ students have described their experiences of isolation and being invisible with no adequate access to bathrooms, having student cards that don't reflect their identities, the daily violences of living in single-sex residences, and homophobic experiences. Higher education institutions have been described as patriarchal, masculinist, heterosexist, and heteronormative, meaning that being Black at university will be colored by other factors such as class, sexual, and gender diversity. Transformation policies in higher education in South Africa and internationally have typically focused on the race question and have not paid sufficient attention to how other markers of identity impact on people's experiences of Blackness. So one of the first photo stories that presented by one of the participants in my research was about the statue of Cecil John Rhodes. And this photograph was taken in 2013. And the story is called Power and Internalized Inferiority. And in it, the student says, this picture shows the main statue of Cecil John Rhodes on Upper Campus. As I took the picture standing in front of the statue, I thought about the internalized inferiority that is imbued in my psyche as a Black student at UCT. These are unconscious processes that dictate my relationship with others, my decisions, the way I speak, and how I have come to perceive myself and people who are of my race. Standing in front of the statue of Cecil John Rhodes, I still felt the power of the colonizers on my colonized forefathers and myself in contemporary South Africa. In taking the picture, I was still positioned in a lower position of both the statue and my white fellow students standing next to the statue. This elevated their position in relation to me, and the jammy stairs were a metaphor for the upward mobility of Black people and how that meant that whiteness or the colonizer's position needs to be aspired to. The fact that I adjust my accent and continuously refine my English is a reflection of this and the Black person's positionality in this institution. The critical insights and analyses presented in these stories stand in stark contrast to the stereotypical notions of backwardness and deviance attributed to Black students. Despite these excruciating experiences of marginalization, these students were incredibly resilient and resourceful and employed multiple strategies to cope and resist, even though these strategies were often very complex. For example, students often assimilated into the dominant culture by taking on certain cultural practices, such as modifying their language and changing their accents, befriending and engaging in the activities of white students. And there is another PhD from UWC this time, but I highly recommend the work of our colleague Sibonile Mpendukana, who has written on race and language during the Shackville protests. One student told me that when he started making friends with his rugby teammates, his marks started to improve because he no longer felt like an outcast in the classroom. But these strategies led to difficult dynamics amongst Black students, some of whom were accused of being coconuts and other similar derogatory labels, which then created additional layers of marginalization. In order to protect their self-worth, some students would understandably distance themselves from the transformation project as one that applied to only other Black students. These complicated identity dynamics meant that Black students, in addition to their academic requirements, had to find strategies for coping and relating to each other, highlighting the additional burden placed on them. They had to put in the extra effort to fit in, to prove themselves, to defend their right to be at UCT, and to defend their Blackness. Any student studying under these circumstances was doing double the labor just to get by. It was inevitable then that something would eventually erupt. And on the 9th of March 2015, we witnessed Umani Makwele throwing feces at the statue of Cecil John Rhodes, which marked the beginning of the Rhodes Must Fall movement. The stories that students shared with me highlighted the challenges of being Black at UCT 10 years ago and the centrality of race in the politics of transformation. The politics of Blackness have been at the center of the Rhodes Must Fall movement and the many resistances to institutional racism. In so many ways, the Rhodes Must Fall movement was so powerful in bringing Black students together, a very difficult task to achieve in the context of institutional whiteness. Yet, we have equally seen how the movement has been fought by these same racial, gender, and class dynamics. Different groupings started sprouting, such as the Black Radical Feminists, the Trans Collective, Mhlangano, and others, that the Rhodes Must Fall leaders will no doubt speak to with much more knowledge and clarity than I can. I want to also emphasize how powerful Rhodes Must Fall was in mobilizing a whole campus community and the impact it had nationally and throughout the world, despite these very difficult and painful internal dynamics. By drawing on theories of Pan-Africanism, Black consciousness, and radical Black feminism, the movement tried its best to build a common agenda across relational violences, and it's inspired many far and wide. White students got involved through the Disrupting Whiteness Collective. On one occasion, they formed a human shield between Black students and the police during one of the more intense confrontations of the protests. The Black Academic Caucus also found expression thanks to the Rhodes Must Fall movement, with many of our members driving curriculum change and having our African-centered scholarship, which we had long been advocating for, finally recognized as central to the academic project. During the occupation of Azania House, we got a glimpse of the work of Black academics from UCT and elsewhere who came to engage students with their work. I remember in particular Professor Suren Pilay's contribution, who was still at UWC at the time. We had Adekeya Adebajo from the Center for Conflict Resolution, Kobano Ratele, who was at UNISA, and Pumla Gola, to mention a few. So academics came from different parts of the city and country to participate in this groundbreaking conversation series. The insourcing of workers was a massive achievement, enabling working class employees access to job security, but also access to UCT for their families, thus contributing to the changing demographics in our student body. The national impact reverberated across the city and the country. At least 20 statues were defaced across the country in 2015, including King George V at UKZN, Paul Kruger in Pretoria, and the Gandhi statue in Johannesburg, amongst many others. Some would have described this as vandalism, but the intention behind these acts to open conversations around how these public displays of memory were live instruments and political statements that make claims, justify, legitimize, and support particular ideas and perspectives. The statues that societies choose to display are guiding instruments on how to reflect on and remember the past, and they influence our worldview, our sense of belonging, and our relationships with others. And here I refer you to the work of our colleague, again, Sibonile Mpendukana, who provides a very insightful Fanonian analysis of Black pain, Black identity, and the language of protests during Rhodes Must Fall and Sharpeville. Open Stellenbosch produced the very moving Leicester documentary, and protests at the university currently as Rhodes broke out, followed by significant work done to address gender-based violence in higher education. The University of Pretoria launched the Afrikaans Must Fall campaign, and Stain Must Fall formed at the University of the Free State. In their 2024 article, Daniel and Miller referred to Must Fall protests in Malawi, Senegal, Ghana, France, the Netherlands, the UK, and the US, highlighting the global and transnational impact of the movement. Specifically, Gandhi Must Fall at the University of Ghana, Royale Must Fall at Harvard, and Fadebe Must Fall in Senegal. I don't think we have ever acknowledged in our institution that what this movement sparked was monumental. And I hope that today's events, as well as planned events throughout this year and in future anniversaries, can do justice to the gift that our students left us and the rest of the world through the enduring legacy of their critical intellectual insights and disruptions. Fallism is a provocation and an ideology of disobedience, of disruption, of contestation, of ending racism, coloniality, patriarchy, and all forms of oppression. It was, of course, sometimes confusing where the students were going with this, when in the middle of this disruptive moment, there was also the celebration of a Rhodes Must Fall wedding at Azania House too. I thought we were being disruptive. But anyway, in the end, we are still human and full of contradictions. What I will remember most poignantly from the Rhodes Must Fall protests during the occupation of Azania House was the act of community building and the creation of a space where students felt that they belonged, where they could imagine a different world, and where they could thrive intellectually, thus fundamentally shifting notions of academic excellence. That moment reinvigorated existing spaces across our institution, in particular in the Faculty of Humanities through the African Gender Institute, the Center for African Studies, and in my department through the subsequent launch of the Hub for Decolonial Feminist Psychologies in Africa. At UCT, we have come a long way since the 9th of April 2015, with considerable demographic change, curriculum change, in-sourced workers, renamed buildings, reviewed artworks, gender-neutral toilets, gender non-prescriptive student cards, amongst some of the victories. And I must acknowledge that these gains also came at great costs, as many have mentioned before me. I have mostly spoken about the less visible forms of institutional violence that students live through on a daily basis that are shaped by oppressive histories and ideologies. In addition to this, during the protests, the relational confrontations between students and between students and staff have left many traumatized. 10 years on, I hope that we have healed sufficiently so that we can heed Dr. Motimere's invitation to see beyond a singular definition of violence. She says, as she writes, UCT management, some UCT staff, media, police, and members of the public considered Rhodes Must Fall's disruptive and destructive actions and methods of protest as violence. Further to this, these groups identified Rhodes Must Fall student behavior during the protests as rude, aggressive, disruptive, and at times illegal. In contrast, student activists recognized violence as rooted within colonial apartheid configurations of context. Now that the dust has settled, let us examine the complexity of this violence and dig deeper into its roots so that we can develop better tools, better frameworks, and better spaces for developing what Ashanti Kunene describes as a much-needed relational tenderness. We must continue to reflect on our epicolonial existence and keep listening to our students and staff in addressing the less visible institutional dynamics that reinvent themselves in ways that continue to exclude and marginalize. Finally, I think it is important to disavow the notion that the Rhodes Must Fall movement did not ultimately achieve what it set out to do. There have been many criticisms of the movement as not addressing the broader problems of poverty and equality and inequality in South African society. There were many demands placed on students to address the plight of workers, rape culture, raising consciousness in schools and communities, and in addition to a decolonized higher education. The responsibility placed on our students to address all the remnants of coloniality in contemporary life was too heavy a burden to carry, and activism fatigue set in. The Rhodes Must Fall movement must firmly take its place as one of the most influential global movements in the call to decolonize universities. Despite the variety, multivocality, and complexity of its modalities and enactments, Rhodes Must Fall successfully centered questions of Black identity, unity, and self-determination that remain at the center of contemporary social movements for social justice. Its synergies and contradictions offer much food for thought and a rich tapestry of ideas and possibilities for the continued struggle against the legacies of coloniality in our institutions. The Rhodes Must Fall movement inspired us and gave meaning to Angela Davis's famous call that you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. Our students showed us that such a path is possible and that we are indeed the ones we have been waiting for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for those really powerful and beautiful, beautiful words. And indeed, we are here today, 10 years on, we are here. Now I shall call upon Professor Pillay, who is the chair of the AC Jordan, director of CAS, to respond to Professor Kessi. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. I know you've been sitting for a while, so I'm tempted to not go through the list of formalities and thank all the Vice Chancellor and simply resort to the language of our political leaders, which is to say all protocols observed. But welcome, everybody. Yes, indeed, what a difference a decade makes. And I want to start by appreciating the Dean's observation, and I quote, that we probably have never acknowledged in our institution what this movement sparked, that what this movement sparked was monumental. And I hope, she said, that today's events, as well as planned events throughout this year and in future anniversaries, can do justice to the gift that our students have left us and the rest of the world through the enduring legacy of their critical intellectual insights and disruptions. I think I also want to appreciate very much the heart-wrenching but also increasingly perhaps heartwarming stories that the Dean has shared with us from the research project that really opened a window onto the experience of Black students at UCT over the last few decades after apartheid. It is quite clear to me also why Black academics at UCT found common cause with Black students. While Black staff in the teaching staff might have not shared in the economic precarity of students on a day-to-day basis, Black staff's experiences at this institution were often just as alienating, often demeaning, often silencing in a number of instances. Again, I think of what a difference a decade has made. While the number of Black students has increased significantly since 1994, the change in staff composition is often a different story. But again, I think is an increasingly good story to tell. There is significant progress in addressing the racialized demographic imbalances in staffing. More and more, I think students can find in their lecturers and their professors a reflection of the diversity they experience in the world, in the city, and in the country, and even on the continent. Of course, there's a lot to do. I was not at UCT when the events of 2015 and 2016 unfolded as a staff member, although I was on the campus the day the statue was removed, and I do have that special memory of being invited to share some thoughts on the decolonization of knowledge with the students who turned the Bremner building into an autonomous university of sorts, Azania House. I was a staff member at UWC at the University of the Western Cape, which was, of course, a historically Black university with a famous history in the struggle against apartheid down there on the Cape Flats. The evening before I spoke at Azania, I was in an occupied students' residence on the UWC campus, invited with other staff to address the students there on the question of fees, but also the debates around the decolonization of knowledge. Those were indeed heady days that reminded some of us of the vivid experiences of the school boycotts in the Cape Flats of the 1980s, and how as students, we fumbled our way toward what we called a people's education, an education that would replace what was called the remnants of Bantu education as we were receiving it. If we fumbled in the 1980s, I think many of us were in awe of the confidence, the erudition, the thoughtfulness, and the diversity of opinions of the students we heard speaking in the RMF moment. I dare say that some academics here at UCT and other universities across the country seem to get some things right after 1994 to produce these students. Even if former activists turned university administrators sometimes struggled with what it meant to be on the other side of the picket line in that moment. Opening the doors of learning, as the slogan went in the struggle against Bantu education, also meant opening the doors of culture. To open the doors of learning, it was also to open the doors of culture in the struggle against apartheid education. An education, of course, that's celebrated as the monopoly of one race of people who originated in one part of the world, but who had the hubris to enforce their culture, their knowledge, their political systems, their economic systems, and even their understanding of ourselves as Africans upon ourselves. To open the doors of learning, A.C. Jordan famously quipped, was his task when he was asked why he was leaving Fort Hare to come to UCT. It was not just to open the doors for others to enter, though, but also to change the knowledge we would teach when we enter. That is what it means to open the doors of learning and culture to a new generation. I appreciate very much that we're gathering also in this particular building today to mark this moment. Just yesterday, we celebrated the birthday of our late colleague, Harry Garuba, a previous director of the Center for African Studies, a remarkable poet and scholar who came to South Africa from Ibadan University after apartheid and made this city his home and this university's transformation his mission. We remembered Harry through his intellectual legacy, his rigorous but gentle poetic insistence that we theorize our own experiences as Africans, because he shared that vision for what African studies should be at UCT. He, like others before him who worked in this building or previous incarnations of the Center for African Studies, availed themselves to take on the task at considerable cost after 1994. The names of Archie Mafeje, Mahmoud Mamdani, Amina Mama, and more recently, Lungisile Ntsebeza, have understood that this center was created to study native life for the purpose of better exploiting Black South Africans to more efficiently rule the colonized majority. It was part, of course, of an international imperial institutional network of knowledge, dotted across the Anglophone regions of the continent, in places like East Africa, which had the Makerere Institute for Social Research in Uganda. The challenge for centers like CAS and institutions like UCT after colonial rule, after apartheid, has been to subvert its mission of serving colonial domination to serving post-colonial freedom. From the study of the native as the other only studied this side of the Limpopo, the mission is now to study ourselves in order to better understand who we are and our place in the world. The mission is to challenge the partition of knowledge that suggests we only study Black life or native subjects in area studies programs, while the disciplines of the university continue to produce what is considered the universal knowledge, i.e. the European experience. What was electrifying about the RMF movement was, I think, precisely the connection the students in the movement made between racism, colonialism, and knowledge, as we've just heard in the presentation of the Dean. Students reminded us that racism was directed not just to making judgments about our skins or how we look, the outside of our being, but that the violence of colonial racism is that it also applies to the partitioning of our minds. so that we thought we could have nothing to learn from those north of the Limpopo in what was described as the Dark Continent, or that we have nothing to learn from those who are similarly seen as lesser beings in Latin America or Asia or the Middle East. We have come a long way, but as I've said, there's a long way to go. More so as we witness the anxiety of a global minority of racial elites trying to turn back the tide of history to a time when they reigned supreme. The right to teach whom we wish to teach, the right to speak about difficult questions of freedom and justice, the commitment of education to producing new citizens who can make the world a better place. These are hard-won freedoms that are under constant threat, whether they be an apartheid state, a neoliberal market logic, or powerful alignments of moneyed elites and supremacist ideas trying to undermine the political and economic and intellectual sovereignty of those who have sacrificed this for us. Those who lead our institutions, our VCs, our deputy VCs, our deans, and all of us are custodians of our academic freedoms, and we're all entrusted to protecting it when it is under threat. RMF has put before us, I think, in post-apartheid South Africa, a new grammar through which to talk about our oppression and our justice demands. And it put before us in the university a new conceptual slogan through which to name what the challenge of our times might be, nothing less than the demand for a free, decolonized education. And I think it is still an aspiration that is worth committing to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pillay, for those really powerful words. Colleagues, friends, comrades, allies, and people of goodwill. Now we are transitioning into another aspect of the program. I hope that you've been noting your questions and your points of discussion, because after this musical item, we will be jumping straight into those short films to create that specific context. And then immediately after that, we're jumping into the battle of ideas. So I don't know if Kujenga, if you are ready, you let me know as soon as you guys are ready. Yes, so you must note down your questions and your points of discussion, because we will be calling a panel after those short films. That's when we'll be having a discussion this afternoon. I know the reason why I am not really talking a lot this afternoon, I remember at some point I was invited to a decolonial school to talk about Rhodes Must Fall. So the organizers let me speak for 2 hours, non-stop, 2 full hours. Like I was talking for 2 hours. And when they asked me to facilitate, or rather to MC this very important occasion, I said to myself, I really need to, to restrain myself, because I can talk for 2 hours or even more. Where I used to work, I used to get paid just for talking, just to say something. So I would get money at the end of the day. So I don't know if Kujenga, if you guys are ready. I will now hand over to Kujenga to give us a musical item. Thank you very much, guys.
That was a film called Him for Hani, the dedication to Comrade Bitani. We're gonna do one quick one and then we'll end our item. Thank you so much for Rhodes Must Fall Anniversary Symposium for having us, as well for inviting us. This is a song called Carrying Forward in the spirit of revolutionary action and resistance against the forces of oppression, the way us down. Please enjoy it.
All right, you let's give them a round of applause, please. That was beautiful. You can tell now we're transitioning, right? We're jumping now into the deeper waters. Ngesixhosa kuthiwa sidadele emzulwini ezolonke mhlekazi wami. We're swimming now into the deeper waters with sharks, of course. Now, colleagues, now we are actually jumping into our first short clip, right? We're doing our clips now. They're very brief, few minutes of our time. Maybe if we can turn off these lights, if possible. So we're jumping now again back into 2015. Do I just press? Yeah, so we're jumping into 2015. These two short films, there's one, in fact, we have three, but two are by Kurt. So Kurt, who was on that day when the statue was removed, even the days before. So he basically shot these two clips, but the last one is basically a compilation of different clips by myself and other comrades who were tasked with the responsibility to capture the heartbeat of Rhodes Must Fall using, of course, our modern technological tools, cameras. I was one of the people who were tasked with the responsibility to capture the archive of the Rhodes Must Fall because we wanted to avoid this thing of having our narrative appropriated by those who hated us but wanted to use our pain for their own narrow political ends. So wanted to avoid that. From the beginning, I was given a task to capture. And today they put me in a very precarious situation here. I should be carrying a camera running around here, but I was told, no, you're going to MC. So I said to them, these comrades, no, I think Mate must actually facilitate this panel discussion. Then I can go get my camera, my own machine gun. I must bring it here so that I can capture this moment. But right now we are going to watch these two clips. Second one, let's give a round of applause to Craig. Thank you, Kurt, wherever you are, for capturing those very important moments. If we are here, thank you very much. Last one, please. On the sticks. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have to journey back in time. Now I hear, where is Comrade Mate? Kavume moyawa, Uma moyawa, Uma moyawa. Come on, Mastoli. Kavume moyawa, Uma moyawa, Uma moyawa, moyawa. Kavume moyawa, moyawa, Uma moyawa, moyawa. Tulunga Rhodes Must Fall. So now I'm going to hand over the microphone to Comrade Mate, who will facilitate this discussion. And all the panelists will be called to come and occupy these seats in front. And please, this is a very important moment now. So you know, if you had this question that you've always wanted to ask, this is a safe space. We're told. I mean, this thing of safe space sometimes. So it is a safe space. There is no question that will not be addressed here. This is a Rhodes Must Fall movement. It's not Rhodes Must Fall was not a perfect space. But of course, we try to attempt to answer any question. But of course, there are people who may have been, experienced Rhodes Must Fall in many different ways. So please feel free and don't be shy to raise your question. You can raise it in whatever language. We are not, linguistic politics here. We are not going to police people from expressing themselves. in whatever way you want to express yourself, please feel free. And I will hand over the microphone to Comrade Mate. And I hope that there is no one here who has a problem with photos being taken in the space. If you have problems with that, you can just raise your hand so that we can skip you. So the things of photos that are underpinning politics that we have come to experience in many different ways. Some of us who have been part and parcel of the Rhodes Must Fall movement. So you can just indicate so that when I come with the camera and say, no, I'm the one, don't take a photo of me, so that we will understand. So Comrade Mate, the platform is yours, leadership. And yeah, so we will then go through that process, and then after that, after the discussion, we'll do the vote of thanks, and then we close, and then we eat. I think there's food prepared for us. Thank you, leadership.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kasibe. My name is Sipuku Shemache, and what has happened here is that I went out for a nice stretch break. Ndakutyulwa. AmaXhosa would say isiXhosa sitolikwa, and so I will not be translating what ukutyulwa means. And so at this juncture, having moved from one fire music performance to very short but interesting, fiery snippets from the Rhodes Must Fall movement, I would first, at this instance, welcome again and greet all the members who were at this mic and spoke before me. I don't have a list of names and I don't want to leave anyone out. And so I will say all protocol observed. Firstly, I'd like for Thando Lukele, the SRC president, to come and take her place on this panel. Please give her a round of applause. The position she occupies at this moment is one that was a very contentious position to hold during our time during the Rhodes Must Fall movement. To occupy the position of a mediator of power and still be at the side of students is a very, very difficult job. Second, I'd like to call Masitole Mlandu, who was at the forefront of the Rhodes Must Fall movement, and who is someone I happen to have as a classmate. I guess I should confess that in our first year, when we were taught political science by Harry Stefan, I would go to the dinner table and I'd find him there, and I knew I had not yet done my readings, and he would give me a great executive summary of all the readings, and all that would be left for me to do is to find a relevant quote from the readings, whether it was Locke, Hobbes, whether we were discussing power, authority, or any of the themes that came up in our first year. He indeed did save me quite a number of times. And so next, we would have Mr. Athabile Noncuba is in the room. This is also another person who took on a very interesting role during the Must Fall movement or time, in that he was on the side of the workers. And I think if we were to go back 10 years ago, he would be asking why we started this event at 3 p.m. when many of the people who were part of Rhodes Must Fall would not be able to be here. He was that kind of a person. So welcome, Athabile. Next, we have an alumni representative, Mr. Sabelo Mcinziba. Now, I must say upfront that Rhodes Must Fall is the most robust intellectual movement to come out of South Africa post-apartheid, and I can say that without any fear or favor. And so, to kick us off, oh wait, how could I forget the pool master himself? I'd like to call upon Kumani Matwele to come and join this esteemed panel. He is no stranger to these things. And what great metaphor that there is no chair for him. As yet, the battle for space continues. Now, welcome, Mr. Matwele. On that fateful day, on the 9th of March, if I remember correctly, one course that I really used to chow here on Upper Campus was JAM 1000W. And on this particular day, I think I just had lunch on the Jammy steps, or the then Jammy steps, and I had to rush to the bank for one or other reason. Perhaps the reason was that there was no money in my bank, but I can't remember. And as I was rushing down with a friend, there was this guy wearing headgear, looking like he, could have come straight from a mine, and he was throwing feces, at the statue. But I could not stop for long because the bank would close at, I think, 3:30 at the time. But what then happened is what he will come to explain as to where did you collect the feces from. And one thing I've always wondered, in Wandile's car, what music was playing as we were transporting the feces for that great face of Cecil John Rhodes? Over to you. Please hand him the mic.
Hello. Well, my name is Tumani. And well, the question of the pool, I must say it came as a result of numerous discussion among my comrades, Wandile, Tadelo, Matolele at the bank. And of course, those discussions came as a result of really deep frustration of being a UCT student and being Black at UCT. And at that time, in 2015, really, of course, the way other debates were held, I remember in the very same hall. I think at that time, the debate, one of the major debates on campus was about using race as a proxy. And at that time, like acting as a liberal kid who would come on campus without being a student, it was one of my privileges, right? And then, of course, this privilege was reserved for white kids who are living around Runabush. And then I so happened to live around. And then I would come, and one of the great scholars, Professor Nel Alexandra, was here. And then this debate was discussed. Why must we accept Black students at UCT because they're Black? And at that time, there were like some of the very influential white lecturers and white professors. They were really against this debate. Why are we going to use your Blackness, your race, so that you come in UCT? And of course, they refused to accept the condition and the structural condition that Black students were at. And then I came as a result of that kind of debate. And then, of course, at some point, we attended a seminar with Sabelo and Bartolele that was presented by Professor Soshe. And again, in that debate, Prof was presenting her study about how Black students represent themselves on campus. And she was telling us this, that instead of Black students going around campus having these cameras and photos of themselves in the public space of UCT, in front of Jamison Hall and so on, they would take their photos behind buildings as their representation of being at UCT. Now, this kind of debate for me was saddening, but most importantly was how Black people reacted during discussion. People were so scared. Even professors, even lecturers, Black lecturers and Black professors were scared to speak openly about their condition. And after a discussion, you would find all of us going in a corner. Hey, I wanted to ask this question. I wanted to ask this question. But why did you say there? And then you realize that there was a deep fear, whether you were a first year student or you were a professor. All of us were scared of speaking out. And of course, today you're asking me, where did I get the poo? I got the poo from Kailisha, of course. And fortunately, I didn't use Wandile's car. Wandile was in Joburg that day. I used, interestingly, a taxi driver, like at that time there was no Uber, there was Mr. Taxi. I asked this guy from Long Street, dude, please, man, can you assist me with something? With what? No, I'm gonna go and collect people in Kailicha and then I'll pay how much you want. And then he told me. And then on the way to Kailicha, and then I told him, dude, there's this project that I want to do. It's not people, but I'm gonna collect feces. And then the guy said, really? Yeah. And then this guy so happened that he came from Senegal, and then he assisted me. And then he really didn't refuse. I don't know whether he didn't refuse, whether he understood the struggle, or he didn't refuse because I was going to pay him. But he did it. And then, of course, we were scared, and then we took it. And then we brought it on campus. And of course, the reason why I bring the pew on campus, for me, was again, as a result of fear. I mean, we discussed this thing with Sabelo about 2 weeks, 3 weeks before, or 2 months, actually. And Wandile, who said, look, dude, let's use the poo to throw against the statue. And then somebody said, no, let's use grenade to blow this thing apart. And then there was all of us were scared as to why must we do this thing, and so on and so forth. And for me, and of course we will, like naturally as students and Black people, you go away with your ideas, different fears. And those fears, of course, is about whether my scholarship has been paid, did I get my grant, my employment, and so on and so forth. And every time I went for a run, I would think about this thing. I would think about its simplicity, that it's doable. And then when I go home and take a shower, nothing again. My fears come back. But one day I decided, look, I'm going to go and do it. Now, and I'm saying this thing of fear, because even today, we still have problems in the university that it's hard to overcome fears, particularly when there is hostility against those who speak out and stand and speak the truth. I was happy that Prof Kessi gave this address because she's one who represented a symbol of being Black at UCT, and particularly being a professor, right, a lecturer or a doctor, to speak. And then she was one of the very few people who came during 2015 openly to stand up and say, look, we are joining the student, we will advise the student, we will assist the student. And then I must say that there were so many other Black professors who didn't take an action, who were not part of it, who refused to be part of it. Unfortunately today, for example, we've got Professor Chinyoke, I don't know that he's still here, Thierry Chinyoke from Zimbabwe, right, a mathematician, right? Today, he has been expelled at UCT, right? Again, on this issue of fear, because people sometimes they think that when we take action because we've got courage, endless courage, but we take action because we're scared, right? Professor Chinyoke, together with Professor Kessi and Professor Ramgondo, actually, they were the first people who stood up at the side of academics, right? Now, you must then understand the reason of standing up as an academic, your career, your job, and so on and so forth. right? Most importantly, your intellectual production. Now, when Professor Chinyoke is being expelled at UCT and disciplined, the message that is being sent to all of us, that if you are black, you say something, you will be dealt with, right? He's expelled today, not because he has committed crime here, not because he has squandered his job duties. No, because he stood up during 2015 and afterwards assisting students with discipline and so on. I'm saying this thing because I'm saying it out of fear, again. Fear that is around campus that, again, some of the things that we don't talk about this fear. Professor Chinyoke being a Zimbabwean, the message is that for a very long time, black professors from Zimbabwe, Nigeria, wherever, here on campus, choose to keep quiet. They don't do anything. The reason why is that they're scared of what will happen to them. But today we are celebrating Rhodes Must Fall, 10 years later. A person who was there, who stood with us, has been expelled. By who? If you check the authority of people who expelled him or who saw his letter of being expelled, suspended, young, all that kind of disciplinary process, it was black people in position of power, right? Now, not just him, Mate, in closing, not just him, Professor Ramagondo, who's our DVC today, right, was disciplined just last year and January this year. A DVC. We thought that criminalization was reserved for us as black students. We didn't know that someone at the executive position can be disciplined and be charged. Professor Nakona, I remember she was going alone with her family. The husband here is here. Going to disciplinary training by who? By her own colleagues who are black, not white, black colleagues. Today, Professor Ramagondo was here welcoming us. Vice Chancellor was here. I'm saying the Rhodes Statute and the Act itself come as a result of deep pain, of fear. And today, we are powerless that Professor Chinyoke, and I'm sure in the corridors of the university, his fellow colleagues, our own professors who are from Zimbabwe, or from Nigeria, or from Botswana, who are in our departments here, are asking themselves, why did you speak? You thought that we were stupid when we were keeping quiet. Professor Shose, when she applied to be a dean, people ate voting cards, right? Why? Because Professor Shose is not from South Africa, right? Now, I'm saying, we're saying these things because these are some of the things that we tend to do to each other as black people. I was telling my colleague that the rumor now at UCT, if you are from Zimbabwe, from Nigeria, from Cameroon, keep quiet, don't say anything. That's the kind of the reason why I went to take the pool. I thought the pool was the safest thing to do instead of me easily do things that would be criminalized, you know. But I'm saying we must remember those who have suffered in the course of Rhodes Must Fall, for standing up for Rhodes Must Fall. And we have an example today of someone who has been expelled, Professor Thiri. I really, really cried with him and fight for him. I hope that one day he will win his case. Our own people now who are leading, remember we said we want transformation. Now tomorrow Atabile will be the head of what? Him as a black person, he will say to me, hey Mchana, please man, follow the process. Go and answer all the disciplinary tone, whatever. No, we are still in CCMA. Don't disturb me. Him, Atabi, my comrade. No. Go through CCMA, go through High Court. You see, this is the kind of pain we are suffering. I appeal those who've got power here to remember Professor Chinyoke, to assist him, find ways. Don't say you don't know about the case. But one thing I can tell you, he did not commit any crime. Otherwise, if he did commit a crime, the case was not supposed to be in CMA, was supposed to be in the Rondebosch police station. From Rondebosch police station, goes to Magistrate Court. From Magistrate Court, goes to High Court. That's all I'm trying to say, that we can talk, but the suffering we have suffered. I was expelled in the university. I was rescued by the High Court, right? Now, the pain that I went through suspensions, you know, It was hard, but I went through. But the High Court said, you must come back. You have not done anything. And UCT never appealed that, meaning the judgment is still there in my favor. But it's not everyone who's going to go through that. One of our comrades went literally mad. Literally. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Kumar. What is coming from Kumani is that politics of the stomach have not ceased, that they continue to affect our body politic, particularly around issues of labor. Of course, this is also a global issue, this idea of security of tenure for academics as well. And so when one speaks is as important as who speaks, and so on. And there's collateral damage that takes place in between. Now, segueing from that, Atabile, please provide for this audience the context in which you emerge as an activist on the side of workers and their rights at a time when the neoliberal university, this glorious ivory tower, would have preferred outsourcing as opposed to insourcing. Of course, the reason why institutions outsource a lot is about risk transfer. Now, there are risks that come into the fold when insourcing happens. Because when the university is no longer financially viable, then that risk is also on that side. So talk to us about this tension between a public this tension about a public institution that behaves privately and where you then fit in that body politic around labor.
Thank you very much. And good evening to everyone. I think, yeah, it's very interesting that within the movement itself, I begin to find myself on the lines of the workers, and I begin to resonate more with what the workers' struggle is. But of course, really, when the time I came to university, I think Professor Shose has captured very well the historiography of the Rhodes Must Fall, and she beautifully captured some of the moments which I also forgot and infused in, and that intersect with that struggle itself. But I'm also one of those students who first went to a classroom with white people at UCT for the first time. So you can imagine what Professor Shose was talking about. I form part of those students. And of course, when we get into the University of Cape Town, we are placed in a residence called Yomakwat, which is a special residence for students who come from the township or students who come from the villages. And I happen to come from those. But interestingly enough, from the very same residence, when we are sitting in the dining hall,